my horn is too loud. I catch people staring, looking funny at me when I step to the window and I toss a TV. Sometimes I get crazy and it makes a big scene, but when I hit 21, I wanna stand up and scream. I'm filthy rich with laughter, I'm too big for the room. You know from 2 stories up, a zenith makes a big boom. It's hard to get around in a 6-foot town when you're 10 feet tall. Everything is so small. I'm always bumping my head, I'm way too long for the bed. Yeah, it's hard to get around in a 6-foot town. Some people live inside a tiny little box. They're preoccupied about mismatching their socks. Well, I've never been one to worry about much. I just wanna laugh and love, I just wanna live it up. But it's hard to get around in a 6-foot town when you're 10 feet tall. Everything is so small. I'm always bumping my head, I'm way too long for the bed. Yeah, it's hard to get around in a 6-foot town. And sometimes I stumble just because of my size. But hey, y'all, that's alright. That's the way God made me. I am what I am, and I can't do nothing about that. Oh, but it's hard to get around in a 6-foot town when you're 10 feet tall. Everything is so small. I'm always bumping my head, I'm way too long for the bed. Yeah, it's hard to get around. Hard to get around.
Hey everybody,
Get around.
welcome in. Glad to be with you today. It is another day, it's another Friday, and so we've got the weekend upon us. Very much looking forward to that, looking forward to having some football, of course, last week being a bye week, so I gotta tell you, that has to be the number one weekend for weddings in the state of Alabama. The week that Alabama and Auburn both happened to have a bye week at the same time. I bet there were all kinds of people getting married on that weekend just because of that. But nonetheless, we're here. It's Friday. Really looking forward to getting some football in. A couple things that I did want to address before we start. You may notice that there is a snazzy new logo there on your screen, or actually, yeah, it would be the opposite side. It's over here. So still trying to learn. It reverses everything with me on camera, but obviously I can't see those here in the studio. So right over there, you may see that our logo has gotten a upgrade, been redesigned, and there's several things that we're using on the show that got redesigned, some backgrounds, some new logos that we're using because we're sort of transitioning from an audio medium to a video medium. So special thanks to my good friend Jessica, who goes to church with me. She's one of my sisters in Christ who just happened to be super bored the other day, and because she is a graphic designer and noticed how my logo was in bad need of an upgrade, she was actually able to assist me with that. So I do thank Jessica for that. I really appreciate it. I appreciate her putting in the time and effort to being able to do that. And it does make it makes our logo, our page, and our site, and of course our broadcast look a lot more snazzy. So it's a learning experience. We're still working on it, but we will be quickly progressing and hopefully be able to get a really professional looking show here before long. But I know that the real reason that all of you come here, I know that the real reason that you are all here right now is primarily because of the political analysis, and that is exactly what we're going to do. And that is one thing that the production value doesn't make a ton of difference on. So that is going to be still here, some expert political analysis for you. So one thing that I did want to mention is if you do want to call in, the call numbers are actually the same as they've always been, 860-1440 if you want to check that out. So should be actually right there on my right. The numbers, the letters, and if you want to call in, you want to tweet, we have @Tactics Radio on Twitter if you want to get involved with us. And we're going to be taking a few breaks just to give me a chance to check up to that. We had a lot of great comments the other day, a lot of things that I wanted to respond to but didn't because I'm trying to run the board and run the Twitter feed and run the show all at the same time. So that's something that we're going to look at getting better, and I do ask that everybody bear with me on that. But please, by all means, keep commenting, keep calling in 860-1440. If you want to be a guest on the program, you can call in and we'll have you on the phone just like we did back in the old days, just like we did on the radio program. And of course, the main reason that we're here to get into the news. The number one issue I think this morning has got to be because they are making their approach, and I just don't believe the timing on this thing is a coincidence. I don't buy it. I don't buy it. The fact that the migrant caravan is coming and that it just happened to start on its way right before the primaries, right before, or not the primaries, the midterms, right before the midterms, I just do not believe that that's a coincidence. And speaking of the midterms, we're going to do a midterm special. We're going to go down the ballot here on Monday. But before we do, I think it's important to notice that I just don't think it's a coincidence that this whole thing, primarily, if you're looking at the pictures and looking at the video that I've seen of this caravan going back and forth, it's primarily pretty fit, military-age young men that are going with some women and children sort of interspersed. And the media would have you believe it's a bunch of pregnant women that are so poor that they barely have any clothes on their back, making their way across Mexico and trying to make it into America. Which there's a couple of reasons why that's a little bit misleading. First of all, Mexico has already offered them asylum. There was a city just a couple of days ago in Mexico that offered the migrant caravan asylum in their country. This is not about getting to a place that is away from their homeland, although I assume that because they are moving from their homeland, they actually do have problems there. That doesn't necessarily mean that they're seeking political asylum or whatever. There are probably some that are. I would imagine in a crowd that large, there are some people that have experienced some legitimate political dangers in their home countries, and that's part of the reason that they left their home country to try to make their way to America. But if all they were seeking was asylum from that and the ability to build a different life, then why did they not take asylum there in Mexico? This is about getting to America. Make no mistake about that. Because if it weren't about specifically getting to America, where we have better quality of life, where we have higher standards of living, where we have a very ridiculously over-generous welfare state that benefits to a great degree people that are not even citizens of this country like we are seeing. If it were not about that, then they would have accepted asylum there in Mexico, but they did not. They turned it down. So this is obviously a move trying to get across the border into America. And here's the deal from a speech that Donald Trump gave the other night. He said that if they throw rocks or if they attack the people there on the border, the troops that he's sending down there, then they're going to open fire. Which, here's the thing. I don't care who you are or how entitled you feel to enter somebody else's country, which I don't even understand that mentality in the first place. But if I did, nothing gives you the right to assault a member of our military that is taking a legitimate defensive stance against an invading force. And so the sentiment behind what he's actually saying, I actually agree with. I think that you're not chomping at the bit to do that. In other words, you use other crowd dispersing techniques like water hoses, tear gas, whatever it is that you need to get those people away from the border without using deadly force, if at all possible. But the idea that somehow the military is not justified in defending themselves if they are attacked by a force that large is beyond incomprehensible to me. They absolutely have the right to defend themselves if assaulted, and that would be true whether or not they were members of the military or not. If you were just random Joe citizen walking near the border and a bunch of illegal immigrants started throwing rocks at you, you would be well within your right to exercise self-defense. And so that doesn't even necessarily just apply to people in the military, but especially if you are in the military and you are charged with keeping people from getting through, then yes, you would be justified in taking that action if you are attacked like that. Here's the political problem with that. And even though it is well known and well documented that I've had my differences with President Trump, I have to admit, at least policy-wise on immigration, he's been pretty good and somebody that I can agree with on a number of issues when it comes to immigration. But from a political standpoint, that was not a wise thing to say, because the way he phrased it, the way, the tone, the demeanor, everything, it made him sound as though he is longing for and chomping at the bit for this event to happen, to where our military has to defend themselves and would fire into the immigrant caravan crowd. And that's not a good look for the president. In my opinion, it was better for him to, even if that was the policy between him and the military, to more or less keep his mouth shut on it and then explain it afterward and saying, look, this was a situation that we weren't anticipating. Things got out of control. Maybe I'm wrong on this, but in my political opinion, I think that was the smart thing from a publicity standpoint to take. And so I think it makes the president come off better if he appears as though that's a last line of defense, that is something that we do not want. If forced to, we will defend ourselves, and that's a stance that's much easier to take after that's happened instead of saying it before, because again, the way he said it, it almost sounded like that's actually what he wants to happen. And I'm trying to give him the benefit of the doubt. I don't think that's what the president actually wants, but I can see how if you already have a negative idea of the president, if you already have a bias against him, if you already don't trust him, especially when it comes to matters of race, and unfortunately there are a handful of rare but legitimate complaints that people have with the president when he talks about race. I can understand how, if you are already skeptical of the president on that issue, that it makes it sound bad. And so that's why I think that the president would have been better served to just hold off on saying that until he has to explain it after it's already happened. So, not necessarily disagreeing with the stance overall, I just think he could have handled it better. But I'll say this. Let's give this a personal spin on this analogy. Let's say that you are, for example, in your own home, and all of a sudden a burglar, somebody who's not supposed to be there, somebody that is not invited and who you don't know, runs into your house and starts throwing rocks at you. Well, obviously, your response would be to either call the police, or in my case, if you have a weapon there to defend yourself, you point a gun at them and ask them to leave, and if they don't, then things could escalate. But the idea that people should just be able to come in whatever they want, and this is really the underlying issue that I've yet to hear a good answer from somebody on the left of this question. What do you want them to do? Do you want our troops, whether you're talking about the National Guard or Border Control, whoever it may be, do you want American citizens that are charged with keeping people out of our country to just stand there idly by and let them walk through? Because every suggestion that I have heard to try to keep these people out has been met from the left with animosity. It has been met from people on the left with, well, you can't do that. Then what is your solution to keep them out? And really, I think the reason that they are not giving one of those solutions is because the truth is their answer would be just let them come through. And so that's what's so hilarious about this, because when President Trump and other Republicans say the Democrats, they really just want open borders, and then the Democrats come out, no, that's silly. We don't want open borders. We want there to be laws. We want there to be a legal process. And then when you say, okay, so how should we enforce our borders? And they don't have an answer. That's because really underneath that facade, they really do want open borders. They want people to just walk across the border without any consequences legally whatsoever. And while I do believe that there are some rank and file Democrats that want to do so out of compassion or because they feel bad for them living in a country that's poorer than ours, or they have some misguided sense of fairness that because America happens to be a wealthy nation and their nation happens to be a non-wealthy nation, then immigration is a form of redistribution of wealth in some kind of crazy way. At least from that perspective, the Democrat voters and a lot of the people that tend to vote in that direction are coming at it from a place of good intent. But if you're looking at the people, and when I say the people in charge, the Democrats that are running the party, the political activists, the ones that are on top and are the kind of the thought leaders for the Democrats, the reason that they want immigrants to come across, and you can see this in the way that they treat them when it comes to voting and wanting people that are not citizens to be able to vote, really what they're doing is they're breeding voters. They are breeding voters, and what they want to do is they want to have people come over here, have children that automatically become citizens, and then when they become 18, they vote Democrat. And if you're looking at the demographics, generally speaking, that is what happens about 90% of the time. And this is part of the reason, and this is part of the Democrat strategy to flip Texas. We've heard about this, especially with the Ted Cruz, Beto O'Rourke campaign, that they're trying so hard to turn Texas blue, and the reason that they are, and from a political standpoint, it makes perfect sense. The reason they are trying so hard to turn Texas blue is because they know that if they ever get Texas blue, Republicans will never be able to hold a seat of power again, or at least not for a very long time. Not until they flip quite a few other blue or purple states. And the reason that I say that is if you're looking at the Electoral College, if you're looking at the Senate and the way that that's broken up to, the Senate not so much because Texas gets 2 representatives like everybody else, but especially the House. If all of a sudden Texas becomes a solid blue state, then we'll never have major gains in the House or is having a president for probably a few decades at least. And so the Democrats are salivating at the idea of that, and that's part of the reason that they so staunchly encourage and support the idea of birthright citizenship. This is another thing that President Trump talked about. He talked about undoing it with an executive order. So I'll say this on the right at the front end of this whole thing so I don't get ahead of myself. The idea that any president, regardless of who they are, could change an actual amendment to the Constitution with an executive order is beyond ludicrous. The only way you can change anything contained within the Constitution is an amendment to the Constitution. That's why we had the amendment that led to prohibition, saying, nope, can't have alcohol anymore. And then we had another amendment, didn't get rid of the old amendment. We actually had to put up a new amendment that says, okay, we're allowed to have alcohol in this country again. The only thing that can undo something in the Constitution is a constitutional amendment, period. And where President Trump is going wrong on this is the idea that an executive order somehow would enable him to change that. But here's the issue that's underlying that. I contend that the president needs to put forward no executive order because the Constitution essentially already says what he wants it to say. And some people have speculated, I'm not sure if this is true, maybe it is, that what President Trump is actually doing is he's putting this idea forward and putting forward an executive order because he knows it's going to be immediately challenged in court and he wants that to go to the Supreme Court. If so, that may or may not be a winning strategy to get the Supreme Court to rule definitively on what the 14th Amendment says. So, again, I contend the 14th Amendment already says what Trump wants it to do, which is just because you are an illegal immigrant and you happen to have a child in this country, you do not become a citizen just because you happen to be born on American soil. So let's look at the actual text of the 14th Amendment. Any persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and the state wherein they reside. So the important part of this is naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof. So here's the issue that you're running into. And honestly, there are disagreements between people that are actual constitutionalists. I'm not talking about people like Barack Obama that claim to be constitutional scholars and really have a disdain for the Constitution. I'm talking about legit people who have degrees in constitutional law, that work for the Heritage Foundation and Freedom Works, that have legitimate disagreements amongst themselves on the reading of the 14th Amendment. A good friend of mine, been on the program a lot, Matt Clark, he tends to be different than me on this, and I understand where he's coming from, but the reason that I say subject to the jurisdiction thereof invalidates it is if you go back in history and look at what they meant when they actually wrote the 14th Amendment. The person that wrote that amendment, Senator Jacob Holmes, he actually said that if you're going back to his original intent, he actually said that this would not apply to foreigners, aliens, and people that were born, for example, that were foreign dignitaries that were here. And another thing that you can look at, and this actually has some precedent in the Supreme Court, one of the reasons that language was added was because they did not want there to be any confusion when it came to Native Americans. Because keep in mind, Native Americans were considered a part of a different nation, and technically still are. There's a reason that if you go up the road not to Shorter, that's actually American owned, but if you go up the road to Wetumpka and they have casinos, even though it's illegal in the state of Alabama to run those, that's because technically Indian land is a sovereign nation, and they are considered citizens of that country. And so even though you were born within the jurisdiction of the United States as a Native American, you were subject to what is technically a separate nation within the United States. And so by that same logic, by that same understanding, why would we believe that somebody that is still a citizen of a different country, whether it be Mexico or some country in South America or anywhere else for that matter, that if they come into this country illegally and are not subject to those laws, that their children would be natural born citizens? That's simply not the case. Now, if you come to America and you are legally here, if you have a green card or you're a resident, whatever else it may be, whether you're a citizen or not and you have a child, you are obviously subject to the jurisdiction of the United States because you have legal documentation allowing you to be there. So if you're over here from China for whatever reason, and you have a green card and you have a kid while you're here, that child is a citizen of the United States. But if you just skip across the border and 10 minutes later have a baby, I'm sorry, that's not the way that the law reads. That's not the way the 14th Amendment reads, nor was that ever the intention of the people who wrote it. And so because of that, even though I think there are legitimate discussions to be had about what exactly the 14th Amendment says, because there is a little bit of vagueness there, I think conclusively, if you're looking at the original intent of the people that authored it, that you've got to go with the idea, especially understanding the reason that it was put in there to make certain accommodations for Native American tribes, that anybody that's coming across that does not subject themselves to the jurisdiction of the United States cannot be considered a citizen if they have a child there. So a couple other things that I wanted to talk about. One thing that happened earlier this week, of course, we all know and really do, your heart has to go out to the people that were killed in the synagogue shooting there in Pittsburgh, the Tree of Life Synagogue. And I got some really good news that I wanted to share because I love bringing good news to people. There is a Muslim group that has raised $200,000 for the families of those affected at the Tree of Life Synagogue. And I have to say, goodness knows that I've been critical of the Muslim religion and those that adhere to it. I think that it's a faulty, blasphemous religion because it does not conclude that Jesus Christ is the Son of God and the only way to come to salvation. But nonetheless, what I love about this story is this is really the spirit of America, which is, I don't have to agree with you to love you. I don't have to agree with you to help you. Because you are my neighbor, because you're a fellow American, and because something bad has happened to you, I want to reach out and show compassion and empathy towards you. Don't have to agree with you on everything. That's not a prerequisite to love somebody. And if it was, we would never be able to love anyone because you don't agree with anybody 100% of the time. And so I just wanted to give some credit where credit is due and also make note of that because in this country, you don't have to agree with everything that somebody says to extend your hand and say, look, we're neighbors. I care about what happens to you. And because of that, I wanted to reach out to you and offer this, offer my aid in any way possible. And really, that's something that we should be familiar with when you're looking at Hurricane Harvey in the past year, if you're looking at the hurricanes, what's going on in the Panhandle, you'll notice that when their neighbors are in trouble, you don't have people showing up and saying, "All right, I've got some water here. Who needs water? Oh, wait. You voted for Hillary Clinton? Yeah, you're not getting any water." That's just not the way that we are. And I love that about America. That we're willing to get together and help our neighbors, and when that happens, the politics just kind of go away. You don't see people asking questions about that. You don't see people, at arms with one another. They just want to take care of their neighbors. And that is a great thing. And so I do want to commend the people that were in charge of that, the people that put that together. I really do think it is a great thing that they were able to do that for their neighbors. So kind of in that same story, one thing that I wanted to bring up that I didn't get a chance to earlier this week because we just started the show on Thursday. For those of you who don't know, there was a really big showing at the National FFA convention, largest one that there's ever been. They were just, I think, about 50 members shy of having 70,000 people in Indianapolis for the National FFA convention. For those of you who don't know, I used to be a state officer. I've been a national delegate 3 times. So I was very, very involved in FFA all through high school and college. And my dad was an ag teacher, so it kind of came with the territory. But National FFA organization, just a phenomenal group of people. And actually, Alabama got a really big surprise this Saturday when Jordan Stowe, who you may remember, we've interviewed her twice now on this program when we were back on the radio. Jordan Stowe, who is running for office, became the Southern Region Vice President from the state of Alabama. They only pick 6 people out of the entire country, and this is 500,000 person organization. It's probably a lot larger now. I'm using the figures from back when I was in it. But out of 500,000 people, we had somebody from Alabama selected as one of the 6 to represent the country. And that is a really big deal. And so congratulations to Jordan Stowe. Really proud of her. She's a quality human being. For those of you who have listened to her interview, you can tell how sharp she is and very, very deserving of that honor. Well done. She's from the Enterprise chapter. So really proud of her for being able to do that, and proud of the Enterprise chapter also for making the semifinal round in parliamentary procedure. For those of you who don't know, that's the debate contest that I was in. Part of the reason that I'm able to do this every day is because of the skills that I learned while I was doing debate in parliamentary procedure. So a really great contest, very, very difficult. They are the first team, to my knowledge, since my team to actually get a gold emblem and make it to the semifinal round. So representing the state of Alabama very well there. Congratulations, Enterprise FFA, for being able to do that. But one thing that happened at this convention that has not happened for a really long time, I guess it would have been H.W. Bush, who was the last president that spoke at the convention. Donald Trump, at that Saturday when the Tree of Life synagogue was shot, actually made an appearance. And what drove me absolutely insane is that you had several media outlets like the Daily Beast trying to take pot shots politically at Donald Trump over this. Because one thing that they mentioned is that he should have canceled the speech or whatever. And then I was on Twitter that day, and I watched the whole speech beginning to end because I was watching the convention, and so I watched the entirety of Trump's speech. And they talked about how insensitive it was that he went and spoke to these young people, and they also spoke about how he didn't really mention it and he didn't bring it up, and they said he joked about canceling the speech because he was having a bad hair day, as opposed to thinking about canceling the speech because of the massacre that happened in Pittsburgh. And to anybody looking on that didn't see the speech, that's probably pretty convincing. And I remember the joke. It was just a goofy joke that he spent a couple seconds on. He says, "Oh, my hair was messed up, so I considered not even coming," which was pretty funny, especially considering how legendary Donald Trump's bad hair days are. But nonetheless, one of the things that just really grinded my gears about them characterizing that is because, like I said, I watched the entire speech, and he came on stage right after he greeted the FFA. That was the first thing he talked about. And before he moved on to another subject and gave the speech that he had planned, he brought on a preacher and a rabbi, both from Indianapolis, to give an invocation. That was actually the bulk of his speech, is talking about that event. And then he went off and talked about some typical things that you would expect Trump to do. And then he came back to that same subject again and talked about it. So the idea that he never mentioned it is beyond ludicrous. And in that same speech, he did talk about how he did consider flying to Pittsburgh immediately and canceling the speech. And the reason that he gave the audience that he didn't do that is because he was afraid that that would make the bad guys would essentially win, that the terrorists would be able to change our lives and change what we do based on their actions. And so he actually did say that he considered canceling the speech because of what happened in Pittsburgh and decided against it and explained why. So the idea that he didn't give adequate time to it, he spent way more time on that than anything else that he talked about that day. And the media just mishandling it, they don't even understand that when people cheer because Donald Trump calls them fake news, that's the reason why. That is exactly the reason why. Because they'll take one soundbite, completely distort the entirety of the speech and distort what it actually meant, what actually happened, and pretend as though they're just producing the news, that they're putting out the news exactly as it is. They pretend to be completely objective. I'm sorry, but when you do that, and then anybody that watched the speech can tell that you're completely mischaracterizing the entire thing, that's why people cheer when Donald Trump calls you fake news. And another thing, too, because I heard this so many times last week talking about the vitriol and the rhetoric, and that's the reason that these horrible events are happening. I actually heard somebody on CNN say, I heard these words come out of their mouth, and they were completely serious, that we just didn't have this kind of thing before Donald Trump. That there was not this animosity towards the media before Trump showed up. No, that's not even close to true. Media conservatives have disliked you for decades. Decades. Now, it's gotten worse in recent years, but the media has not been trusted for decades in this country. I mean, the fact that Fox News was destroying everybody else on ratings for about 20 years is a tribute to that. Whether or not you like Fox News, look, Fox News is biased. It's very pro-Republican. I understand that. I'm not saying that they're objective. But what I am saying is the fact that they were the one news organization that didn't have a liberal bias and they were killing everybody else in ratings is a testament to the fact that people did not trust traditional news. And Republicans did not trust traditional news. So this idea that everybody agreed with the media and thought they were great and thought they were doing a good job, and then Trump shows up and suddenly everybody hates the media, I'm sorry, there's just absolutely no truth to that. Think about the polling. Back when the primary was going on, and you were wondering about who was going to be the Republican nominee, remember that one of the things that really picked Ted Cruz's numbers up and got him to win at least a few states is that in that moment in the I guess it was the second or third debate where he went after the media. Guys, conservatives have always hated the media. They've always hated the fact that they will hide behind this fake veil of objectivity and pretend as though they're bringing you the news when it's very obvious to anybody watching that isn't a committed leftist that they have a very clear political agenda that they're trying to push based on their coverage. And so this idea that this is a new phenomenon, that Trump is the one who invented this animosity towards the media, no. Trump gave voice to it, but it existed long before Donald Trump ever thought about running for office. Long before that. And I can speak from experience as one of the people that was in that camp. So that's just the thing that really bothered me last week is the way that they mischaracterize it. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a short break, and I'll be back in just a second. We'll be back, probably about 60 seconds. Just give me a chance to catch my breath and check some of the comments. We'll be back with your comments.
Are on fire from trying to slow down. I'm always burning my tires and my horn is too loud. I I catch people staring, looking funny at me when I step to the window and I toss a TV. Sometimes I get crazy and it makes a big scene, but when I hit 21, I wanna stand up and scream. I'm filthy rich with laughter, I'm too big for the room. You know, from 2 stories up, a zenith makes a big boom. It's hard to get around in a 6-foot town when you're 10 feet tall. Everything is so small. I'm always bumping my head. I'm way too long for the bed. Yeah, it's hard to get around in a 6-foot town. Some people live inside a tiny little box. They're preoccupied about mismatching their socks. Well, I've never been one to worry about much. I just wanna laugh and love. I just wanna live it up. But it's hard to get around in a 6-foot town when you're 10 feet tall. Everything is so small. I'm always bumping my head. I'm way too long for the bed. Yeah, it's hard to get around in a 6-foot town.
All right, welcome back. Thanks.
Sometimes I stumble
And
because of my size.
I've got a couple other stories that we do need to get to. First of all, one thing that I thought this was funny. Feeney, who you may remember, I'm a huge Boy Meets World fan. One of my favorite shows from when I was little. The guy who plays Mr. Feeney, I think his name is William Daniels. He actually stopped a robber, and he's in his 90s. So he stopped a robber from coming in his house. The guy was breaking in, and he flipped the lights on. The robber runs away. Everything's fine. He and his wife are good. By the way, he is married in real life to the actress who played his wife in Boy Meets World. So a little bit of trivia there for Boy Meets World fans. But he actually scared off a robber. And immediately after that, Will Friedle, who plays Eric on the show, tweeted out, "Don't mess with Mr. Feeney." So apparently that is true. He scared a robber off despite being 90 years old. That's just a feel-good story for the day. Another thing I wanted to mention is that you had a bunch of Google employees actually stage a walkout. So what happened is a bunch of Google employees are upset at the way several sexual assault allegation cases have been handled with very high-ranking members in Google, and they actually walked out to show protest in this. So here's the thing, and I want to characterize this in the proper light. If people are actually guilty of sexual assault, they should be fired. I don't know of anybody, liberal, conservative, doesn't matter, that does not share that opinion. However, one thing that is a little bit ironic in this whole thing is that they are largely protesting a problem that was created by them. And I know that sounds a little counterintuitive, but follow me on this. One of the things that has happened in the hashtag MeToo movement, which I will readily agree has done some really good things and has unseated some people that really, frankly, needed to be unseated. That has taken some people out of positions of power that did not need to be in those positions because they were abusing that power to make sexual advancements towards people. And that's not okay. So if that is what is going on, I have no problem whatsoever with that person being fired. But here's the issue that you're running into. Part of the reason that you're getting these golden parachutes, that people are being bought out of their contract for a ridiculous amount of money, whether it's at Google or any other big company, is because it is actually cheaper for them to buy the person out of their contract at a fraction of the price than it would be to actually go through the legal process of proving that they committed sexual assault or some kind of harassment and get them out of the contract that way, even though they wouldn't pay anything to that person directly. It is cheaper to just go ahead and give them the money just on the allegation, whether or not the person actually committed sexual assault, just to avoid the PR nightmare. It is actually cheaper for them to give them a ridiculous amount of money to go away, to pay them off, essentially. And I get that that's frustrating. I get that that's unfair. It's not a practice that I necessarily think is good. But here's the issue. Ironically, a lot of the very same people that are in the Me Too movement that are upset over this are the ones that created the environment to where this practice is taking place. Because of the PR nightmare and because they knew that there were going to be people and they would actually lose customers in the meantime for being viewed as being quote unquote soft on sexual assault allegations, just the allegations themselves, whether or not they were true was a different matter. If they could prove that they were true, then they would just nullify their contract automatically. And so a lot of corporations take this strategy to where they just get rid of the person by giving them an awful lot of money just based on the allegation instead of having to fight it and prove the allegation in court. And so the same Me Too movement that are saying we should just believe women without any proof, that we shouldn't have to go through the process, that we should just fire someone right away just because the allegation takes place without actually discovering whether or not there's any truth to the allegation, those are the same people that were protesting the other day. And so, again, I actually am somewhat sympathetic to their cause because I don't like the idea of someone, if he actually did commit sexual assault, from getting this golden parachute. But the reason that corporations are willing to do that in the first place is because these same people demanded that we just believe women and that we go ahead and fire people based solely on allegations, whether or not they happen to be true. And so it is ironic that they are protesting a effect that came from a cause they created. So that was just something that I did detect quite a bit of irony in. Now, one other thing before we go today. Actually, we do have a couple things. I wanted to talk about my recent trip to the Ukraine. And I haven't had really a chance to get into some of the details on this, but for those of you who don't know, I was gone for about a week for a mission trip to the Ukraine. And I won't get into all the details because I know that you're here for political analysis. One thing that I did pick up on is that while it's certainly a nice country as far as amenities and technology and all of that go, it's not a third world country. I was never feeling like I was unsafe or whatever. But, you know, the tech and the facilities, the standard of living is not quite up to par with the United States. And one thing that I did think about while I was over there, even though this was a minor footnote when it came to the larger experience I had, because frankly, I had such a great experience, there was a part of me that didn't want to leave. I mean, the people there were so friendly, so nice, and I really enjoyed the fact that there was a genuine curiosity about God's word that frankly you just don't see much in America. I mean, there were school kids that literally walked or biked several miles to hear the Bible lessons that we brought, and that was just incredibly heartwarming. So the people were great. I was never mistreated by anybody while I was over there. But one thing that I did notice about some of the living conditions and some of the technology that they have, it really does show a stark contrast in a country that has a mostly market-based free market system like the United States and has had relatively since its inception. It's gone up and down a little bit in the time since then, but the point is we do primarily have a market-based capitalist society. And another country like the Ukraine that was subject to the rules of the Soviet Union for a really long time, they had just horrific historical problems like the Holodomor. And actually, if you'll notice, the symbol on the cap that I'm wearing is the symbol of the Ukrainian resistance. And so that is the insignia, I guess, of the people that fought Stalin and fought Lenin and were against the Soviet Union, and they finally did gain their independence. And so they put this logo on everything now, which I think is appropriate. But nonetheless, when you're dealing with a country that for a large chunk of its history was either a monarchy or a socialist/communist country, and you're looking at the quality of life they have, it really does make you aware of why America has such an amazing standard of living. because we have allowed people to benefit directly from the fruit of their labor. They are able to come up with new ideas to serve their fellow man, and they are rewarded by doing that with monetary things and better opportunities for their family in the future. And that has led to a society that, at least monetarily and materialistically speaking, is considerably ahead of even well-developed countries like the Ukraine. There's a reason we have the highest standard of living in the world, and that is primarily because we became wealthy by adopting free market ideas and letting people benefit from their own labor, to draw in the benefits and allow their family to benefit from that as well. And that is a stark contrast from a country like the Ukraine, who has really only been able to operate in a free market system for the past 20, 30-ish years. And so they've made a lot of advancements, but they're still playing catch up. And great country. Again, I would head back there in a heartbeat if I had the chance to, because I love being able to teach the Bible to people over there. I love how warm they are. I'm not knocking them. I'm just saying that if you're looking at it from an economic standpoint, it's very clear that there's a reason that our system is superior to theirs, or at least that now that they're adopting free markets and now that they're adopting a lot more of their policies, it's really benefiting them. But that's a contrast to a country that has had that free market system basically since its inception. And it's not because America is just this special place that nobody else can replicate. If you apply the same principles of morality and the same principles of economics, if you apply those same principles to any country, I contend that they will flourish regardless of the conditions surrounding them. They may not have as many natural resources, but the point is they are going to do well economically because you're allowing people to benefit off of their own labor. So that being said, I do think that it is time that we we wrap it up for the day and go to our daily dose of stupid.
No, you messed it up. You're stupid.
Okay, so today for the daily dose of stupid, Peter Joffrin, who is the person that is running against Mo Brooks. Mo Brooks represents Huntsville. He's the House of Representative. He's the representative for the House of Representatives in the United States for that particular region in Alabama. And his opponent, Peter Joffrin, was doing a radio interview not long ago. And when asked about what he would do when it comes to gun control, because he is a Democrat, he said that he would enact some common sense gun control. When they tried to pin him down and ask him for specifics on what exactly that means, he talked about limiting magazine capacity. And when they ask how many would he limit it to, he tried to hedge. He doesn't want to say because he knows he's in a very pro-gun state. So he says, well, I don't think that it should be 100 or 30. And then they ask him, well, how about 10? And he says, no, 10's too much. Let's go with 5. Now, what's hilarious about that I don't think Joffrin even realizes, and this is what happens when you have people that don't know anything about guns comment on them, that would make essentially every single handgun in the state illegal, including revolvers. You could literally have a cowboy pistol that John Wayne would have used in a movie that was supposed to take place in the 1800s, and that gun would be illegal based on Joffrin's answer, because it would have 6 shots instead of 5. Just last weekend, my father bought my sister a pistol for her birthday, which, by the way, her birthday's coming up. And he bought her a Smith & Wesson Bodyguard. It's a .380, so very, very small, very compact, which is good because she has small hands and she doesn't need something that's going to give her a lot of recoil. So she used something very, very small, and it still has 6+1 shots. The mag holds 6, and then, of course, you can carry an extra one in the chamber for 7. So this is what's so hilarious about this. By Joffrin's own admission, what he's saying is he would essentially make every single gun that is manufactured that currently is out there in the market in Alabama, he would make it illegal. If you did that, the only handgun that you could have on you theoretically would be a Derringer, a little 2-shot pistol. Because every other one that's manufactured has at least 6 shots in it. So again, Democrats knowing absolutely nothing about guns, trying to justify their ridiculous restrictive policies that would essentially just outlaw guns. Because if you're saying, I don't want to outlaw guns, I just want to outlaw this feature on guns, which all guns have, well, then you're against outlawing guns. Like, they might as well have said, well, I'm okay with a gun as long as it doesn't actually fire anything. Well, then you're for outlawing guns. And so hopefully it won't be an issue. I don't suspect that it will be. Mo Brooks is very beloved in that particular district, and I really can't see Mo Brooks losing the House. I hope that he doesn't. I think that maybe with the exception of Gary Palmer, he is by far the best representative in the House for the Alabama delegation. He is certainly better than Martha Roby and Mike Rogers. And even though Adderholt's not quite as bad, better than Adderholt as well. So Mo Brooks is definitely one of the better members of the House in the state, and I would hate for somebody that is a provable idiot like Joffrin to wind up taking his seat. One thing that's hilarious about that too, though, is he tried to hedge it and talk about how there are certain restrictions on how many rounds you can have in your magazine when it comes to hunting. That's true, but they're not regulating the gun itself or how many rounds the magazine can hold. They're just regulating how many rounds you're allowed to have in your magazine at that time, and that's very specific to the game that you're hunting. And even if that were the case, again, Second Amendment isn't about hunting. Never has been. And so the second someone starts talking about that and regulating that and start trying to use hunting as a justification, you can pretty much tune them out right then and there, because that's not why the Second Amendment was written. And another thing too, considering that guns are the number one deciding factor in whether or not a rape is completed against a woman, if you're looking at roughly 50% of attempted rapes are completed if the woman is unarmed versus it's, I want to say less than 2% of rapes that are completed with women that are armed with a firearm, then you're looking at a world of difference there. And so I don't understand why Democrats will talk about the war on women and talking about female empowerment, and they want to take away the one thing that is the single biggest factor in whether or not a rape is completed, and something that really empowers a woman to be able to go where she wants, do what she wants, and to be able to stand on equal ground physically and being able to defend herself with a man. I do not comprehend that. All right, so that being said, we're going to go ahead and wrap it up here with the Chaplain's Report.
In 1775, the Continental Congress created the Chaplain Corps. Under the command of General George Washington, each soldier was required to attend worship service every Sunday. While other armies advanced on their feet, Washington's troops advanced on their knees. It's time for the Chaplain's Report with Caleb Colquitt on tactics.
Okay, so Chaplain's Report this morning comes from the Gospel of John, chapter 1, verses 9 through 10, which states, "There was the true light, which coming into the world enlightens every man. He was in the world, and the world was made through him, and the world did not know him." So there is a wealth of information in those two verses. You could probably spend an entire sermon just looking over those two, but I'm just going to draw out a couple of quick points. First of all, where it talks about Jesus as being the light, it also talks about him being the creator. And so we have revealed in this verse that Jesus is the light that enables every man to be able to see, and he is also the one that created the world. And so what's really important about this verse is it sets up Jesus as being the one who enlightens the world because he is the only source of it. Because Jesus is God, and God is the source, the Father of all lights. And so because of that, any power that we see, any enlightenment, any reason, any logic that we understand comes directly from Christ. We are made in the image of God. We understand that from Genesis. And it's appropriate that John is using language very similar to the creation story when he talks about this idea of who Jesus is. Then he's saying he is the one who created the earth. And so, through Jesus, we are able to receive enlightenment. Through Jesus, we're able to obtain true knowledge. Through Jesus, we are enlightened and brought to a higher state than just our base animal instincts. And this is really an important lesson that he is trying to convey, that any type of logic or reason or human rationale that we have, it is a gift that comes directly from Christ. which is also significant because that's exactly the tool that we use to come to better understand and better know Christ. And so we reach enlightenment, which the Gospel of John is talking about here, through a better knowledge of coming to him. There are a lot of things that we can become enlightened on. You know, we may have knowledge of, if you're a doctor, the human body. You may have knowledge of, if you're a radio personality, politics. But the point is, all true knowledge, all the knowledge that is really important, everything that we need to have a right relationship with God, and even the reason that we have for our secular information, our secular knowledge, all knowledge about the natural or spiritual world comes directly from Jesus. Without him, we have absolutely nothing. And that's why he's described as a light. Because without the knowledge, without the wisdom, without the image of God being placed on us by Jesus Christ, we're just animals stumbling around in the dark. Stay the course, friends.